some familiar names. I can see Chris Mahoney and Steve Jury have joined. Thank you so much. Just going to preface the session today by letting you know that we are activating Plan B, which is that I am going to be your host for today. Unfortunately, Dan Richardson, our lead nutritionist, is stuck in some traffic on his way home. So he messaged me asking if I would want to jump in, which of course I am prepared to do and more than happy to do as well. So anywhere that you see a picture of Dan for this session, he was meant to be here, but that's going to be me. Some of you might have joined our session in December, and this is going to be quite different. Obviously, you've joined knowing that the title is Managing the Creatine Conversation in Primary Care. And this is really a session that's going to go a little bit more in depth and touch on where we really are with the science, the research, and help you understand how you can answer some of those tough questions that people are bringing into clinics. They're asking their dietitians, they're asking their nutritionists, they're asking their GPs. And a lot of that is fueled by information that they are getting from social media. So before we go any further, just a few important housekeeping points is, first of all, clinical objectivity. Jenerise, which is our company, has no commercial sponsorships associated with this session. It's totally science-led and education first, and everything you hear tonight is grounded in peer-reviewed evidence. The second thing quickly is that this content is for educational purposes only. It's not a formal medical session or medical advice, and it's purely intended to support and not replace your professional clinical judgment when you're caring for individual patients. And then finally is the chat. So the chat is active and we will be messaging in there throughout the evening. I'll be available as well. However, please use it professionally and in a friendly manner. So any kind of disruptive or spammy links will be removed, and that's not exactly what we're hoping for. So we do encourage you to post questions, ask anything as we go. And what I'm going to do with those questions is turn them into a nice follow-up email by the end of the week so that you do get a written answer to keep and save in reply to your question. So feel free to message in the chat. Now, the recording will also be sent to you before Friday, and it's just exclusively for people that registered for this event. So even if you didn't make it and you want to get the webinar, I'll be sending it out before Friday. Or if you need to jump off early, you won't miss anything because you'll get it as a private YouTube link by Friday. So without further ado, we've got two amazing speakers today, Isabelle and David. They are also guest monthly contributors on our blog, so perhaps you're already familiar with some of their content and the messages that they're really passionate about delivering. But before we get started, I'd love to understand who's in the room today. So if you could please let me know through the chat by dropping a number 1, a number 2, or a number 3. From what perspective are you joining us today? And number 1 is more from a medical perspective. Maybe you are a healthcare professional, a GP, a medical student. Number 2, potentially a brand, a founder. I think I saw a couple of email addresses in the registration from B2C companies. You're more than welcome. And then finally is just curious consumers. Maybe you are interested in understanding more about your supplementation routine with creatine, and that would be number 3. So this also gives David and Isabelle a little bit of an insight as to who they're speaking to today. See if I can see the chat. Yes, okay. A little bit of everything. This is fun. Okay, we've got two 2s, a 1 and a 3, a couple of 1s. Amazing. That's great. My perspective, I would say I'm number 2. I'm definitely not a number 1, although that's why I'm excited to learn so much from Isabelle. So Dan Richardson is not able to make it. However, I do still have a QR code for him up on the screen. Dan's great. He is a performance nutritionist with elite athletes in the UK. He's also my co-lead on our education program. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code and follow Dan on Instagram if you'd like to. And today, of course, we are here to listen to two people that know a lot more about the creatine research from a clinical perspective than I could ever talk about. And that's why we're really excited to have Isabelle Statovci. She is in Switzerland, and David Propst, who is joining us from the East Coast of the United States. Really, really grateful that they are here today to talk to you about their really interesting topics that they actually chose based on what they've learned from their positions in the clinical world and working as a physician. And so Isabelle's really going to be diving into the research reality of creatine supplementation for the brain health. And she's going to cut through a lot of the noise that we see on social media. It's a really exciting place for the research, but it's important to stay clinically grounded and have an objective picture of what the evidence is actually saying about creatine and cognitive function. Isabelle's going to go first. After Isabelle, we will move on to David, who's going to be taking us through some of the common creatine myths from social media, and then accurate safety guidelines. So how can we best explain potentially how much creatine to supplement with, etc. So if you've got patients or customers or friends that have been asking you questions recently, I really hope that this evening is an opportunity for you to really understand a lot more and be able to give some great answers to those questions. So without further ado, Isabelle is going to go first, and her presentation will be shared by Isabelle herself. So I'll let her switch over and take over on screen share from me. Isabelle, if you need any help setting up your screen share, please just let me know. I'm going to stop sharing right now.
A big welcome from my side, and thanks to everyone for joining the call. Creatine and brain health. It's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, as Rachel alluded to. And to be honest with you, when we look at the available scientific evidence, it's a bit mixed. There is a mechanism, obviously. There appears to be a signal in certain situations, but there's also genuine uncertainty in some areas. And today's session, I want to go into all of that and share with you what we do know, what we don't, and how to talk about this with your patients or your clients without overselling or underselling. So let's get started. The session overview. So here's how things are going to go. I'd like to start a little bit with the noise, what social media claims versus reality, then touch on the mechanism, why the brain is different. We'll dive a little bit into the evidence landscape, which unfortunately, due to only having 20 minutes, I can't go extremely deep, but I will certainly try and give you a flavor of what's there. We'll look at some clinical applications, and I'll touch on the regulatory context, which I think is important for where we are at the moment. So what does social media claim? There's a lot going around on TikTok and Instagram and our favorite social media platforms. There's claims that 5 grams of creatine daily will give you an instant brain boost, but the reality is a bit different. 3 to 5 grams of creatine has not reliably raised brain creatine on MRS. We don't have any randomized clinical trials to show these effects. We've had references to the CABA trial, the Alzheimer's disease trial, saying or claiming that it reverses disease. But in fact, this was quite a small study with only 20 subjects, and it was only they were only supplemented with creatine for 8 weeks. And so it's more of a feasibility or a proof of concept study, and not something that that supports any disease reversal. And then maybe one of my other favorite ones is this stack, the ultimate brain stack, creatine plus lion's mane and omega-3 or what have you. And here again, we don't have any randomized controlled trials to back up this evidence. They may be good, there may be something behind it, but without that, we don't have the proof, I guess. So it's basically extrapolation from bits of scientific evidence that have been made a bit larger than what we can, that we can claim at the moment. So a good framework for clinical conversations, if a patient comes and asks, what does creatine do for me? Does it help my brain? Which is probably, more what's going to be asked as opposed to physical performance, which we know is well characterized. So that's an easy question. For brain, it depends on which brain, to which state, and at what dose. The evidence here is emerging, and the moderate effect sizes are moderate. So the greatest signal still remains in metabolic stress and depleted populations, and the dose-brain relationship, as I touched on before, is less well established. So we have stronger evidence, obviously, for physical performance, and the biology is related here, obviously, between the two, but it's definitely not equivalent, and that needs to be kept fore and foremost. I want to touch a little bit on the biochemical foundations, because that obviously helps us understand how creatine works in the brain. We all know, everyone on the call, I assume, knows what creatine is, and these facts have been flying around a lot, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. I think it's important to realize that we have a large amount stored in skeletal muscle, and obviously much less, approximately 5% distributed in the brain, heart, and other high energy demand tissues. The phosphocreatine energy system, this is I think we can liken it to an emergency sprint battery. Think of it as your brain's emergency fuel. When neurons need instant energy during high demand activities or cognitive tasks, creatine kinase converts the ADP back to ATP by using phosphocreatine as the phosphate donor. And this keeps regenerating fresh energy and much faster than oxidative phosphorylation. The transporter is a very important mechanism here. It's the primary way that the creatine uptake is in the brain. And it operates at near saturation under normal physiological conditions. And this helps us to explain a bit why the standard dose of 3 to 5 grams per day does fail to reliably raise brain creatine, because basically we can't get more in via these transporters. Just to touch on, how this can be done. Obviously, the higher doses at 20 grams and that you may have heard of, this floods the system, and by doing that, you're forcing the creatine through, despite this saturation of the transporters. There is limited brain synthesis. It does the capacity of the brain to synthesize on its own is limited, and it does rely predominantly on peripheral synthesis via this SLC6A8 importer. So why is brain creatine the most demanding customer? We can see that it matters a lot. The brain is only 2% of body mass. 20% of total body energy is consumed by it. So we can see that the brain is a very energy hungry organ. And this extreme ratio, it means that neurons need instant fuel. During normal conditions, this is fine. But during stress or sleep deprivation or cognitive load or hypoxia cases where oxygen is limited, the fast energy system becomes very important, if not critical. The three mechanisms matter here a lot. The PCR as energy buffer. So I mentioned this just previously, that the phosphocreatine rapidly regenerates the ATP during high demand cognitive tasks. The mitochondrial shuttle, where creatine facilitates transfer of high energy phosphates from mitochondria to cytoplasm, and the neuroprotective buffering. And here, phosphocreatine helps maintain energy homeostasis, and this is during these stages of stress, hypoxia, oxidative stress, and neurotoxic insults. So all very important for the brain, and goes to show that creatine isn't just a gym supplement; it's a brain energy system. Measuring brain creatine is important, and if we want to look at the research and be able to understand the effect or the impact that creatine supplementation has had, we want to know that it has reached the brain. And we can do this by two ways, with technical considerations, basically for both. And there's a nice paper that was published in 2026 by Kandau et al., which looks into this in quite some detail. But simply put, we've got the HMRS, which has a higher sensitivity. It's what is used most commonly in randomized controlled trials, and it's usually available in the clinics. It measures total creatine though, and cannot distinguish phosphorylation state. So in contrast, we have PMRS, which actually is able to look at phosphocreatine, and this is helpful because it directly then can measure the energy metabolic state, which gives us, greater insights into what is happening in the brain. I think there are some clinical trade-offs, as I mentioned. Both ways of measurement have their pros and cons, and some studies we see both being utilized, in others one or the other, and in other studies we don't see any measurement of brain creatine. Yeah, the HMRS basically tracks the creatine changes post-supplement, whereas the PMRS gives us a better metabolic specificity. But we require then, longer scan times, less available clinically, and at a higher cost. So these things, it's important to take into consideration as we move through. So this is a meta-analysis which was published in 2024, and a meta-analysis basically the idea is to combine a whole group of high quality randomized controlled trials, and by pooling the data, we get a bigger effect size, and we can make better assumptions about what creatine is doing in the brain. Unfortunately, in this situation, there was some double pooling of some of the data, which led to a little bit of weakening of what we can claim from this. But they did show that there was positive effect on memory, on attention. Processing speed was debatable based on this double counting of results. Overall cognition showed no significant effect, and neither did executive function. So I think this study, we have to be mindful that it pooled a lot of studies together, and those studies were also quite heterogeneous. So we need to take the findings with a grain of salt. So dose really does matter, and I think I've touched on this, and I think dose has been talked a lot about also in social media and on other platforms. And dose for the brain, it really looks like that a higher dose shows more consistent brain uptake, and the 3 to 5 gram per day, which is adequate for muscle, may be suboptimal for the central nervous system. And I think this is backed up by it is backed up by some of the studies coming through. The trade-off we have here is obviously the gut or the gastrointestinal intolerance issues that are seen at higher doses, as well as maybe cost and compliance as well. And that also makes things difficult when conducting trials. when we think about compliance. Novel delivery strategies of creatine are coming more in the spotlight. There are a number of different forms that are being looked at, but at the moment it's all preclinical, and we don't have any data on this in humans available yet. So what does the evidence show us? I think we've heard, probably a lot of us have heard about sleep deprivation. And I think there's quite a nice study which gives moderate evidence of the impact on this. And at a single dose of creatine actually preserved cognitive performance and brain phosphocreatine following 21 hours of sleep deprivation. And that effect was seen via PMRS in the brain. And it's one of the first studies of this type, and I'm sure there will be more. Mental fatigue, also emerging evidence to suggest that creatine supplementation helps when we look at complex attention and physiomotor performance in fatigued subjects. And also hypoxia is a very interesting case. There are studies now which show that creatine supplementation maintained corticomotor excitability when compared to placebo, and also cognitive function when deprived of oxygen. So really interesting areas that are starting to show some positive signals. So yeah, I don't think I need to go there. Alzheimer's disease. This is another study that's been rather in the spotlight, and I think it's a very promising study. As prior evidence was always restricted to animal models, now we have evidence in humans. And it did actually show 11% increase in brain total creatine. So we know that it was having an effect on these subjects. We also saw increases in fluid cognition and working memories, improvements, and it showed a safe and well tolerated, as we would expect, knowing creatine safety profile. I think we really need to be mindful of the caveats, though, here. It was a single-arm design. There was no placebo control group, and it was in a relatively small number of subjects, which does underpower it for definitive cognitive outcomes. It was only 8 weeks, which means we cannot assess any kind of disease modification in such a short period. And cognitive improvements, and we always should be mindful of this when cognitive testing is in a study. The improvements may be actually practice effects and not actually improvements in cognition. Another thing to take into consideration is that creatine supplementation has largely failed in other neurodegenerative trials. So we just should temper a bit our enthusiasm. Nevertheless, I think there is a signal there, and it's I'm looking forward to seeing further trials of this nature. Other emerging areas is definitely major depressive disorder, where we see mechanistically that it's supported, but once again with small randomized control trials, there is promise there, but we don't, without large numbers, we can't definitively say that the effects are significant, and neither can we use it as a threshold for guidelines. Aging and creatine, this is a very interesting area because it's an area where we think there really could be a use case for creatine. And we see that people with the APOE4 gene showed reduced brain creatine levels, and this also decreased with age and cognitive impairment. So there is definitely a link there, which suggests older adults may have greater capacity to respond to supplementation. But unfortunately, the evidence is really very, very thin. And the outcome of a systematic review was that only 6 studies in this population was identified, and of that, only 2 were randomized controlled trials. On top of that, they were rather conflicting. There was quite a different way that they looked. So one was 24 weeks of creatine supplementation versus one that was 1 week. So very difficult to kind of get any real understanding of what's going on there. And as a result, we can't make big claims around that. Vegetarians have also been, it's been very interesting because, again, there's another mechanism which suggests that they would benefit from creatine supplementation due to their diet. But there has been a large study in 2023 that actually found no advantage from supplementation. And this is, I think we should also treat with caution because it may be the dose that needs to be increased to demonstrate a response. So the evidence is building, but we definitely need more before we can make any definitive comments. I wanted to quickly go back to this regulatory ruling. And explain a bit, because I didn't explain it that well when I talked about the meta-analysis, because the idea was obviously to bring the results of that to your attention. But the EFS ruling was and maybe people are familiar with this, but manufacturers sought brain health claims. So basically, they wanted to be able to claim that that creatine supplementation improves cognitive function in healthy adults. So I think that's important to note that the EFSA did not assess creatine supplementation in disease populations where we know that there seems to be a stronger signal. They looked specifically at healthy individuals. And when the data of the study, which I mentioned, the meta-analysis, which I mentioned previously, came out, and this inclusiveness and the methodological issues with double counting of subjects, then the EFSA came back with the endorsement that there's not enough current evidence to support this claim. Darren Countdow at the time agreed, obviously, with that, but it doesn't negate the mechanistic plausibility, of course. We just need more, we need stronger trials, we need MRS measurement within those trials, and we need to look at disease-specific populations as well. And I think that's a very nice segue into my next slide, where I wanted to highlight to you a bit the critical evidence gaps, which we can see now from looking at the literature, and what's really going to bring creatine forward. So the underpowered studies, which I've mentioned, a lot of them have very small number of subjects. The protocol heterogeneity, so all our creatine studies out there are very, very different doses, different durations. It's very difficult to kind of make substantial, conclusions based across the board. So we need to work on that. The missing brain creatine data, which is so vital to be able to say that the creatine has reached the brain, and special population gaps, as I just referred to on my earlier slide about older adults, women, and other populations where the effect may be greater than the healthy individual. So the future research, how should it look, or how could it look? I think it's again, the quality of the trials. We need to look at trials where we compare doses, 3 versus 2 versus 20, harmonized brain scans, cognitive battery endpoints, which are aligned across trials, all very important. So these kind of things are going to bring creatine up, to stronger evidence of where it of what it does for the brain. So I realize I'm a bit over time, so I'm going to skip this framework, but basically this was just to give you a bit of an idea of how we could use the evidence on different patient profiles and what our recommendations could be to these people based off that. But I know David is also going to go quite into that kind of situations as well. So I will brush over that quickly. The bottom line is, obviously, we know that creatine is safe. We see a strong signal in certain situations. We need to be cautious of the dose and also of general claims about cognition for healthy individuals. Clinical judgment is definitely required, and then we need to think about, when making recommendations, how we do this, and looking at the individual situation of the population or of the person that we're dealing with. So the science is moving in the right direction. It's very interesting, and it's very positive. But I think clinicians and the general public, they deserve evidence, and not just like crazy enthusiasm that this is like the next wonderful best thing. The recent literature has given us the first Alzheimer's disease human data, a new mechanistic understanding of stress and state effects, and a clearer picture of what dose might make the most sense for the brain. I think the next generation of trials will be decisive, and I'm very excited to see what drops next. So thank you so much. I have my references here for anyone who's interested in further reading. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to be able to share some of the insights of the latest research with you all today.
I wanted to just give a little bit more context about Isabelle. And so she has a lot of experience as a senior director of clinical science. And for a very long time, she actually worked at some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, for example, like Roche. And this experience is what has enabled her to objectively look at the creatine research that she shared with you this evening with a very careful eye. You can connect with Isabelle by scanning the QR code right next to her photograph on the slide right now, and she will be on LinkedIn. So next up, we have David. David is also one of our guest blog contributors, and this evening he is going to be taking us deeper into common creatine myths and from social media. You can also connect with David by scanning that QR code there as well. David is a physician assistant who has spent his career helping people understand how to stay healthy in a world full of pretty confusing advice. He attended East Carolina University for his physician assistant program, and his doctoral program was at the University of Lynchburg. So David is definitely, what's the word? I've lost my train of thought. David is definitely someone who is more than credible to discuss these topics this evening. David, welcome, and I'm going to let you get set up with your screen share. Enjoy this one. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you for that nice welcome. Can you still see it just fine?
Yep, we can see it just fine.
Okay, good. Now I can change things. Okay, so just some basic objectives. We're going to talk about creatine and creatinine, to talk about how the kidneys and suggest appropriate lab markers for people to use. Talk about the hair loss myth and some clinical populations that may benefit the most from creatine. It's not just a bro thing anymore, not just for gym bros. But it's okay if you want to be a gym bro or gym lady. So one of the first things we're going to have walking in our exam room are some people talking about the things they read on the internet, because I have people all the time tell me about how they did their research. And as I'm talking to them, their research is TikTok, and they're serious. So that's what the state of the world and research is now, is researching through TikTok. So we got to do our best to be able to explain properly things. And so a few of the main concerns, kidneys destroy, creatine destroys your kidneys. My trainer or my fellow researchers say creatine makes his hair fall out, and others, especially the mom, when your kid starts taking it, isn't creatine a steroid? So we'll go into that. First, we need to talk about safety, which has been kind of mentioned, but creatine monohydrate has over 680 peer-reviewed clinical trials, nearly 13,000 people in the creatine groups, over 13,000 placebo groups, with no, no indication of harm with use. Doses have been, 3 to 5 grams a day, up to 20 or even greater, like in the one that Isabelle showed with the 0.35 grams per kilogram, which can be quite the massive dose, depending on your body weight. And then CreaPure creatine was submitted to the FDA, and it's recognized as generally recognized as safe. And there's I think a similar thing in the UK, and they've also achieved that as well. So the safety in general is established for the healthy person. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. First thing on here, just to go back to the kidney myth. All right, so in general, I mean, I know you can read the slide, so I'm just going to tell you what kind of happens. Creatine in our body, or phosphocreatine or creatine, is in our muscle, and it breaks down into creatinine. For years, creatinine has been used to develop through a formula our glomerular filtration rate, or how our kidneys are doing. In general, if the creatinine rises, that's a sign that the kidneys aren't functioning well, but the creatinine is still not the best marker of that. But it's what we use on a regular basis. What most times when you get a metabolic panel, have creatinine on there. Creatinine itself, again, is not toxic to the kidney. It is mostly freely filtered through the kidney. It's not reuptake by the kidney, so that's why it's used as a reliable marker. But other things can make the creatinine go up. For example, if you just don't go to the bathroom on a long car ride, it will go up. If you have a kidney stone before, or I guess after the kidney, you can have the creatinine go up. If you have one kidney, their creatinine goes up. If you have poor blood flow to the kidney, their creatinine goes up. If you take creatine, their creatinine goes up. So creatine will break down about 2% of what you take into creatinine. And so that'll make the creatinine go up, which will make the eGFR go down on your paper, and then everybody loses their mind. So when you think about, with kidney, abnormal lab for kidneys, you might have somebody's creatinine go up, and one of the questions you can ask, especially these days, is, are you taking creatine? Because not everybody taking creatine looks like again, like the typical gym bro, the guy who has a metrics t-shirt on back from the 80s or something like that, and is muscle bound and everything. And so you don't always look like that anymore. I mean, my mom is 75, she takes creatine. So anytime you see the creatinine go up, you can say, well, hey, are you taking creatine? And if it does, you can expect it to go up slightly. Now there's a little bit more detail than this presentation needs to be, but there's certain amounts you'd expect things to go up naturally with in the kidney, and things that just too much to go up. But now moving on, say, well, okay, if we want to prevent this person from a referral to a nephrologist and lots of testing, which may even include up to a kidney biopsy, and they do say they take creatine, okay, what can we do about it? Well, one thing is to get a better GFR, you can use cystatin C. Cystatin C is created in every cell in the body. And just like creatinine, it's freely filtered through the kidney, and it can still have the same kind of hangups of building up for different reasons, but it gives you a much better, more accurate evaluation of the kidneys. The KDOQI guidelines, when they evaluate it, they use creatine and cystatin C in their calculations to get a much better estimate of the kidney function. So you can do that to kind of see, okay, how are their kidneys really acting? Another thing is a urine albumin test, and that will tell you more about the kidney function as well. So the healthy creatine user who otherwise creatinine has been normal all along and the number goes up a little bit, let's not put them through a whole lot of expensive testing. Let's just use our brains first and try to cystatin C first and kind of see how that is. Now, the next one on the list is someone who has chronic kidney disease and they may want to take creatine. That's a little different. The research has not been not very thorough on this so far. There's no reason to think that creatine would be harmful in someone like this, but they do need to be monitored. Everything is different when somebody has kidney disease, especially a higher level like stage 4, stage 5. They are different than you and I when it comes down to labs. Everything is different. Every dosing is different. However, there's a great review paper some years back where they're looking at creatine being an absolute necessity for those with chronic kidney disease, because people in chronic kidney disease do not make it as much of the enzymes that help our body make creatine. And so they naturally have lower levels of creatine. So that might be a special population who can benefit from it. There are also companies using creatine in their dialysis products for those on dialysis. So at the moment, we have to say, more research is needed. If you came and saw me for this and you had kidney disease, I think that we just kind of talk about everything that's going on in your life and talk about starting low dose and then probably just checking your labs more frequently. But not everybody's going to kind of do that with you. So you have to, have to be working with a provider who's willing to help you out with it, put it that way. Now, if it rapidly changes the kidney lab, like the fourth line, you definitely can rule out the creatine intake first, but they still need a workup. We can't just blame it on creatine. And then a healthy person asking about it, again, it's safe. There's enough studies to suggest the average person who's healthy that wants to take creatine, they should be fine doing that. Hair loss myth. Okay, this is something that just won't die. It doesn't help that some of your friendly creatine researchers are all bald, but hair loss myth is just one of these, again, myths that just won't die. There's a study in 2009 that's referenced on here. They had 20 people in it, college rugby players. They took creatine a high dose for 7 days and then lower dose for a couple more weeks. And then they measured their testosterone and their DHT, and their DHT went up. And they said, well, it's going to cause hair loss because DHT goes up, you must lose hair. They didn't measure hair. In fact, the DHT levels are still within the normal physiologic range. So there's never been another study until recently that actually looked at this, but it just won't go away. Of course, media and things get on and say, creatine causes hair loss, that kind of thing. If A equals B and B equals, C, then it must A equals C type thing. So what they did in 25 that actually answered the question was they actually took 45 people and they used dermatologists. They used the same kind of tests that a dermatologist or someone else would do to actually count the hair follicles on the head. They followed them along. They went to the part of the hair that's most likely to lose hair. And at the end of the study of 12 weeks, they found no difference overall. You can see in the slide. Overall, there's no difference in the ones who are on creatine versus placebo. A caveat that's in the fine print is the men in the trial, none of them had hair loss disorders. None of them were taking medications for hair loss or anything like that. So that is a limitation. If someone is already having problems with hair loss, is it going to make it worse? It's doubtful, but we can't answer that question yet. So, but we do know that just in general, taking creatine does not cause hair loss. And we don't need that one. Okay. A few other ones we can kind of go through here. Creatine is a steroid. Again, you always hear about somebody's mom saying, I want to take creatine, and mom says, you can't take it as a steroid. It's an amino acid derivative. It's made from 3 amino acids. It's found in steak and fish. It's not structurally similar to steroids. And in all honesty, if creatine is a great supplement, but it definitely does not have steroid type effects. I would expect much more out of it if it was really a steroid. So it's not a steroid. Next one, creatine causing dehydration and muscle cramps. That has been going on for a long time too. And when they actually did a real study on this, they actually found that people who were taking creatine in these football practices were having less cramps. It does not cause dehydration, doesn't cause muscle cramps. Bloating and fat gain. Bloating, there's a case of person will tell you they take it and it makes them feel bloated. And oftentimes that was with the old 20 grams a day loading dose, 5 grams 4 times a day. So for, if somebody says it makes them bloat, well, just get them to take a lower dose. Hey, let's just start on, 3 or 5 grams a day, because that's proven to be just as effective after 28 days as if you do a loading phase first. Or if they've done the 5 grams a day and they feel like they bloat, let's try 1 gram a day. Do that for a few days, see how you do, and then just go up from there. As with anything else in the world of food, clothing, or supplements, there's gonna be something you can't tolerate. A lot of people can't wear certain jewelry, something like that. It's, that's just how it is. So if they can't tolerate it, they can't tolerate it. Fat gain is definitely not the case. Creatine causes osmotic pressure inside the cell to increase, pulling water into the muscle cell. It does not increase fat. Numerous studies have taken the time to prove that, but it pulls it into the muscle, which is not a benign process. It's not just hydrating the muscle, but there's actually transcription going on due to that stretch. So it's actually one of the functions of it. And all, weight gain initially with creatine is not all just water. And last thing about GI distress, that kind of goes back to the bloating. That is just take a lower dose and give it a try. Take your time with it. Really with creatine, we're looking at the long game here, not looking at a sprint. So I think they can just lower the dose and start slower. So let's talk about a few high yield patient populations. We're getting away from, again, just the young people lifting weights. But let's talk about, where women may be possibly the highest yield population. This is really interesting to me because I have a mom, a mother-in-law, a wife, 2 daughters. I have a son too, but thinking about women are very important in my life. And in general, muscle gram per gram, women will have a lower baseline creatine store than men. And in studies where they look at groups like vegetarians and vegans who have a lower baseline, they tend to be some of the greater responders to supplementation. If it's lower and they have the ability to increase it, then they usually get more compared to the ones that don't. Just a quick caveat on that: in studies that do not measure creatine biopsies and muscle biopsies and creatine early on, they can't really differentiate sometimes. So that's why the studies have done that are really instrumental in helping us understand. But just again, general women's health, there are benefits across the lifespan. One of my references from Dr. Ivy Smith-Ryan, it was really excellent for that. But it goes basically from really from childhood, adolescence, premenopausal, postmenopausal. The effects with lean mass are proven, and we're not everybody has to be a bodybuilder, but we can all use some more lean mass. The cognitive function, we'll see. Isabelle really helped explain that for us. Some studies showing some mood improvements, but overall, it's still, like it says, under-researched relative to the potential. In postmenopausal women, I think what's important to bring up about this is, as usual, we know it's going to improve lean mass, but the bone geometry. Some people looked at the study and said, well, it didn't improve the DEXA, nothing on the bone mineral density change. Well, I wouldn't expect it to be honest. Just real briefly about bone density, you expect to lose about 1% of bone density per year. Bone density scanners like DEXA scanners have a 3 to 6% plus or minus error on average. So even in pharmaceutical studies, they're using very powerful medications. They usually look for a greater than 3% change in bone mineral density to call it significant. Again, creatine being a supplement, not a pharmaceutical, not a steroid, you would not expect such great changes. But what was nice to see is that some of the bone geometry changes had occurred that suggest more bone or better bone health. So that still needs more studies there. And then, we see creatine in women with knee arthritis, and what you find is just in general improved physical function when combined with resistance training. So anytime that people can exercise healthily, a joint that hurts, especially leg muscles around the knee, typically good things happen. Again, just to re-emphasize, as far as it goes to muscle and strength, resistance training is key. Creatine by itself in general is not going to be, as far as muscle goes, effective for most populations. So we always need to make sure people get a proper prescription of resistance training. Sarcopenia, there are some increased studies with this, and was proven over and over again, just like in younger folks. Resistance training plus creatine is better than resistance training by itself in both the strength and muscle masses. Improving some of their functional improvements as well, which is always good to see. GLP-1 medications and creatine, there are no studies on that right now. So we can read somewhere it says emerging, but basically there are no studies to prove it, but it'll be interesting to see. What we do know about weight loss in general is weight loss without resistance training, without properly prescribed resistance training, results in lean body mass loss. Up to around 25% of what people will lose will be muscle. In many cases, the muscle or the fat loss is so dramatic that their function improves regardless. But metabolically speaking, we need to keep our muscle. So it would be a fair recommendation that if you're, have a friend, a patient, or a client who's trying to lose weight from any method and they're doing resistance exercise, that creatine could be beneficial. But again, the studies do not exist yet, as far as I know. Okay, I'm going to skip this one because Isabelle already handled that. We talked a little bit more about these, the who benefits most. You can look at that later when you receive the slides. Just real quick about what people should take with this. In general, creatine monohydrate is key. It's 95% or more of all studies. No other form of creatine thus far has been shown to be superior as far as uptake into the muscle. Just because a form of creatine stirs into water better does not matter. I personally wouldn't dry scoop it, but you can dry scoop it, you can mix it. It's getting in your body, it's getting into your muscle. So stick with creatine monohydrate, the least expensive version as well. We know that, they had done studies where they did loading doses, 20 grams a day, but we do also know that 3 to 5 grams a day is quite effective, especially if you're looking at benefits starting a month instead of, immediately. Timing is really nothing sauce. As long as you take it, that's what's important. If you're looking at creatine purely for muscle dry scoop is the best. You can do that. But we're looking for the co-prescription. Absolutely, if we're dealing with muscle, then we need creatine with resistance training. And then especially folks involved in any kind of sport where there's anything to do with testing, the NSF or for sport or informed choice is a good idea for them. And lastly, if there's any GI issues, just back off the dose, start low, and then just bring it up slowly. This is some stuff for if you're actually a physician assistant like myself. These are some copy paste scripts you can use in the room with the patient that we already talked about each of these. But if maybe somebody could benefit from using these. And just, to wrap it up, bottom line, creatine monohydrate is one of the most evidence-based supplements in medicine. The trials exist, the safety exists, and all the, myths we talked about have been dismantled over and over again many times. We've got some people who are the least likely to take creatine are the most, perhaps the most beneficial or people who need it the most. So we need to keep leaning on our women of any age, especially postmenopausal people with sarcopenia risk. They have the most to gain. We don't need to overclaim or overstate any benefits yet. The cognition looks great, and the benefits in GLP-1 use sound good. But anyway, let's not overstate what we don't know for sure. And I always co-prescribe, resistance training, we need to co-prescribe, properly prescribe resistance training. Every movement is important, but we can get some properly prescribed movement and get some better help for our folks. Here's the references, which you'll be able to see. And thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Amazing, David. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful follow-on from Isabelle's presentation this evening as well. And I definitely learned a lot. A couple of those myths just will not be left alone, especially the hair loss and the bloating ones. They come up over and over. Somebody in the chat, KK, also just asked about creatine HCl, and I've dropped a direct link. I happen to have written a blog post about it last week because that is a increasingly more popular topic over on social media as well. So if you have any questions, you can really easily scan the QR code and follow us from Jenerise over on our Instagram page. We post daily, and we will also be turning some of the information from this evening into some follow-up content as well. And other than that, I wanted to make sure that you are all aware of a couple of other things that we have going on. So we have our weekly newsletter as well. Every Sunday, we put together either a review of a study, or we'll send you our latest podcast episode. Also, there's a new one coming out this Sunday. I'm really excited about the one on Sunday. It is specifically about creatine for women's health, and I had the opportunity to actually interview a young woman who does not yet supplement with creatine, and we went on a journey together answering her questions. So everything from tonight will be shared with you via email exclusively by the end of this week. The recording and the PDFs from our lovely presentations will be yours to digest, read again, share with your community as well. And if you have any questions, you can always just send me a DM or send us an email. That's absolutely great. We do webinars every quarter. Our next one will be on Wednesday, June 25th, if I'm correct, and it's going to be all about creatine for youth athletes, so addressing that under the age of 18 aspect, which is also incredibly interesting. So if you'd like to join, there will be lots of promotion going out about that in the next couple of months as well. So it's safe to say that creatine is definitely having a bit of a hype cycle, but this time it's going to be here to stay. It's got one of the strongest safety and efficacy profiles in nutritional science, and people are really starting to understand its potential. So whether that's in the clinic or in a consultation room, you're probably getting questions about it. So on behalf of David and Isabelle and Dan, who unfortunately couldn't make it, I want to thank everybody for joining today. It's been a pleasure to host you, and I hope to see you again next time. I'm going to stick around for a couple of minutes. If you wanted to just ask me anything about what Jenerise does other than webinars, then I will stick around. But I wish you a lovely rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.